We have many stories to share with you today, starting with a new book by Dr. Joel Westheimer, University Research Chair in Democracy and Education at the University of Ottawa, an education columnist for CBC Radio's Ottawa Morning program. His book is called What Kind of Citizen? Educating Our Children for the Common Good. It's about how schools can teach the skills required for a strong democracy to flourish. To talk more about this, joining me now in studio is Dr. Joel Westheimer. Joel, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Adrian.
Joel, you say in your book, the goals of K-12 education have been shifting steadily away from preparing active and engaged public citizens and towards more narrow goals of career preparation and individual economic gain. What's wrong with that?
That's a great question, Adrian. And I wrote this book because of what I saw is wrong with that. And here's what I think is wrong. You know, the history of public schools in Canada and the United States were really a history rooted in the idea that in order for a democratic society to work properly, you needed an educated citizenry. And so public schools were deeply wrapped up in the idea of democracy and citizenship. It was that famous Thomas Jefferson quote, which I'll paraphrase badly, but he said, if people aren't well educated enough to govern their own affairs, which you need in a democracy, the solution isn't to take that power of governance away from them and give it to a king or something. The solution is to educate them. And public schools have always been and should be, of course, about preparation for life and for a career, but also about talking about our society and preparing kids to take part in that society. You know, I sometimes say, like, if you were dropped down into a classroom somewhere in the world where you would put a blindfold on and then the blindfold's taken off and you're asked, okay, did you land in a classroom in a totalitarian country or in a democratic one? Would you be able to tell? And it sounds like a facetious question, but when you think about it, a lot of the lessons that would be in either place would be the same, you know, chemistry, math, even a foreign language. But so then what should be different about schools in Canada than schools, say, in North Korea?
A lot of parents are going to say, though, that I send my child to school to learn the 3 R's.
Yeah.
I can teach them values. I don't necessarily want my teacher to be imparting her values into my child. What's wrong with that kind of response?
Well, I think that that's partially true, right? We have values that come from the home or from the church or synagogue or the mosque. But there are certain values that a democratic society requires.
What are they?
For example, values of tolerance and diversity, because we have to, in a democratic society, you have people coming together who have to work out their differences and set policies together, right? You don't have a dictator up from on hand, you know, dictating how things are going to be. We also need to be able to have certain kinds of what psychologists sometimes call pro-social behaviors, you know, how to get along with one another, how to have civil dialogue and discourse. But in a democracy in particular, you need to teach the values of participation, because that's what democracy depends on. And here's another one. You need to teach the value of dissent, right? The engine of progress in a democratic society is that we disagree with one another. There isn't one true version of gospel that comes down from on high.
But the truth is also that we also disagree as to what constitutes a good citizen.
Absolutely.
Right. It's a contentious debate.
Well, and that's what makes this topic so terrific, right? If I go outside and ask 100 people, say, do you think schools should teach good citizenship? Most would say, you know, oh, yes, they should teach kids how to be a good citizen. But if you ask them, what does that mean exactly? What is it to be a good citizen? That's when the consensus starts to fray and people start to get into fights. But it's those debates themselves that I think are important to have in schools, and it's unfortunate that we don't see enough of that.
You break good citizenship into 3 categories. Can you talk about those categories?
Absolutely. My colleague Joe Kahn and I did research in schools all across North America where they were claiming to have programs that teach good citizenship. And what we found was there were 3 visions of good citizenship that kind of stood out, right? You know, professors love to categorize things in little boxes. So here's the three visions. The first was the personally responsible citizen. And that was someone who doesn't litter, who shows up to work on time, pays taxes, helps an old person across the street. You know, a good person, the kind of person you'd want to live next door to. And lots of programs embrace that kind of vision of good citizenship. The second kind was what we called the participatory citizen, from participation. And those were programs where they wanted kids to participate in the community, you know, to help out, to organize things and work with others. They know how government works and how to get things done. So I like to say, for example, if the participatory citizens were organizing a food drive, the personally responsible citizens are donating a can of food, right, because they're good people. The last vision is the social justice-oriented citizen. And those are people who ask questions about the root causes of problems. In other words, if the participatory citizens are organizing a food drive, the personally justice-oriented citizens are donating a can of food, the social justice-oriented citizens are saying, how come in one of the richest countries in the world, like Canada, we have people who are hungry?
Now, you make the argument that it's not enough in a democratic society to be just a personally responsible citizen. Why not?
That's right, because I think that's a good thing. But when you think about it, there's not a country in the world, right? A totalitarian dictatorship, a military junta. Any of those countries want their citizens to not litter, to help an old person, to give blood when blood is needed, not to do drugs, all those lessons of character education, right? Everyone wants that. So what's different in Canada? What do we need in a democracy? Well, we need people who are able to think critically about the world around them, make their own decisions, and analyze social policies and vote for the person who best represents their ideas. And that's something that's not being taught enough in schools.
When you talk about social justice, though, citizenship, that's going to set off alarm bells.
Yes.
Some people, because for some people, for some conservatives in the society, social justice means progressive. It means left-wing. Is that problematic?
I'm so glad you're asking that, Adrian, because we struggled with that term, right, and what to call it. And I would like to get away from the common, that's right, it is sometimes associated with progressive or left policies, and that's not what we mean. What we mean is the real definition of the words. There's two words there, social and justice, right? Justice means fair. A society that's fair is what we often strive for in a democracy. And social means pertaining to society. It's not social like a party, but of the society, right? So it's social fairness, right? And what we're talking about there is let's have kids and adults think about what the best and most equitable way to organize our society is, and let's always be moving towards that goal. So, for example, civil rights came out of the notion of social justice, not because it's a left or progressive idea, but because it's a more advanced vision of democracy, right? It's how we function in a democratic society. And I would like to see schools talk more about that.
Are we supporting our teachers enough? These days, are our teachers equipped to provide that kind of atmosphere, or to kind of exist in that kind of classroom where they can support the kind of values that you're trying to
Well, that's the other thing that drove me to write this book, right? I'd say two things: concern about the focus of schools and this moving away from broader citizenship goals to just career-oriented preparation, and the other is the attacks on teachers that we've seen most strongly in the United States, where I'm from. I sometimes feel like a character from a dystopic sci-fi novel, you know, coming from the future and coming to Canada and saying, don't go there, I've seen it, it's terrible, right? But sure enough, of course, the testing all the time curriculum, the attacks on teachers, we're seeing the labor strife going on right now in Ontario. We're experiencing a kind of what teachers call a deprofessionalizing of teaching.
But are they attacks on teachers, or are they rather critical of teachers who don't meet the standard? Because not all teachers are made of the same stuff.
No, absolutely. And there's no profession in the world that has all top-notch people, and some teachers are not. But what teachers are fighting for right now, for example, is things like smaller class size. And so we need to understand that it's teachers who are the ones in this equation who are fighting often for the best interests of children in their classroom, because teachers' teaching conditions are children's learning conditions.
And what's the problem with standardization? You say that you talk about this onslaught of testing in the system. What's wrong with that?
And I'm not against standards, right? Everyone has standards. You and I have standards for our conversation. Teachers have standards, and they all feel accountable to the kids and to parents. The problem is not standards, but standardization, because standardization, by definition, means making everything the same.
Homogenization.
Exactly, homogenization. And when we make everything the same, we take away teachers' ability to draw on their own and their students' passions and interests to make learning interesting. If I ask you, what's a teacher you really remember, I doubt you'll say, or any of your viewers will say, yeah, I remember that teacher who taught the exact same thing that all the other teachers were teaching at 2 p.m. on Friday, February 3rd. That's what I remember, right? No, you remember the special passionate thing that the teacher brought in that was specific to them that you could not get in another classroom. Schools should not be like McDonald's. We don't go in to get the same education in every single classroom in every single school. Of course, we're going to learn some of the same material, but we want teachers to be able to exercise their professionalism to make school interesting, engaging, and meaningful to the kids who are in that room.
So, Joel, finally, when you imagine the school that you would like your kids to attend, what does it look like?
It looks like a place where creativity is encouraged. encouraged, where critical thinking is encouraged, where students get to view teachers, talk to one another, something that almost never happens in schools, where multiple perspectives are brought in on the same issues, and where politics is discussed freely. We like to say, you know, politics has kind of become a dirty word in our society.
It's dangerous.
It's like dangerous, right? People say keep politics out of the school. I say bring politics back in, because the ability to discuss multiple perspectives, to talk about things that matter in our society, and to talk about what a good citizen is and what the good society is, those are not only important questions for kids to discuss, but it's what makes learning so interesting. That's the kind of school I'd like to see.
Joel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
Pleasure.
me, Adrian.
Thank you. Thank you.